Okay, great. Hello, everyone. This is the SIG cluster Lifecycle cluster API office hours on November 3rd, 2021. We followed the CNCF code of conduct. So that means basically be awesome to everyone else in the meeting. Please use the raise hand feature if you wish to speak. It is under the reactions section of Zoom. And feel free to add your name to the attendees list. First up, we have PSAs. Cecile, you have that?
Yeah, thanks, Viprash. So just wanted to point out that the CAVZ, so Azure provider, has released 1.0 following the cluster API 1.0 release. So this is compatible with the cluster API beta types. So yeah, please go try it out and let us know if you have any feedback.
That's awesome. Great work on the 1.0 release. Everyone, please do try it out. Next, we have the open proposal. Are there any other PSAs? I don't see any hands raised. Okay, let's move on to the open proposals. We have a few. Does anyone, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly, I've finally gotten around to making some substantial updates to the machine pool machines document, and there's some really good feedback there we got over the last few weeks. There's a couple big open questions about sort of implementation related stuff, whether we should use a selector rather than a big slice of infrastructure refs, or whether we should allow the infrastructure provider to actually create and delete the corresponding machine. So basically, I'm just saying if people have time to look at this again, I know it's sat here for a few weeks, that would be wonderful. We could really use some feedback because we're trying to clean this up and get it into a PR form, hopefully in the next week or two.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, if people do have time, please go ahead and review the proposal, whoever is interested in that corresponding topic. I see a few proposals have still needs review marked. Does anyone want to talk about those? We have one for the spot instances and one for the HCD provider. I don't see any hands raised. If we don't have anything further to discuss about open proposals, I guess we can continue with discussion topics. Okay. Tilo, yeah, you have the first one.
Thank you. So we got a lot of feedback and a number of reviews to our Ignition Bootstrap configuration PR, which is awesome. Thank you very much, everybody, for getting traction on that and for the feedback. Now, there's one or two issues, depending on how you see it, in particular, which received some attention, and that is regarding Go module URLs and imports that we use. The first is a very good catch, actually, that slipped through unintended. So Flatcar, so basically the stack that we're using for Cluster API, which has Flatcar as the operating system, Flatcar uses the Ignition binary version 1. There's some confusion with the Ignition version configuration version and the binary version. So let's focus on the binary version here. We're using and maintaining version 1. Like we have a fork where we keep maintaining that that binary version, and we would like, for the time being, to get this stack working, to change that import to point to our repository. Currently, that would work without a suffix, but we would explicitly make clear that this is version 1 and avoid confusion with supporting future versions. And so we would add a v1 suffix to our repo and change the import accordingly. And we're aware that this may create some annoyance or friction with what we call the origin ignition. And in the long term, we absolutely strive for reconciling with the origins work. We're currently actually, and that's the second reference there, there's work ongoing in Flatcar, which makes Ignition basically compatible, downwards compatible. So having version 2 would support with that PR version 1 configuration. We would like our users to be able to almost seamlessly transition to the new version without much disruption. The origin has chosen a different path. They ended supporting the first version. Everybody is to use the second. After this support is in and has stabilized, and after our users have migrated, we're also considering to revisit the cluster API work, which would then uniformly be updated to support version 2, if that didn't happen in the meantime. So our version 1 work is explicitly done in a way that other versions could be supported in the same way. And that is also, I hope I referenced that. There was a discussion on that in the PR. Oh yeah, it's the second bullet point, and that's the reference there. So this is the discussion, and it takes a while to load. Yeah, so that was resolved at that point. So we're not trying to fix this to an old version. New versions can be supported alongside, and we're actively maintaining version 1 of Ignition. So there's no maintenance issue here.
Thanks for that description, Thilo. Does anyone have any thoughts on this? Vince, go ahead.
So one question I have, just clarification from my side, like I haven't used Ignition or Flatcar for, like in general. Would having the, I guess like this is a fork that you folks are proposing to use here, would allow other folks to support other Ignition based repos, or just Flatcar?
That depends. The fork that we're maintaining for the time being will allow anyone to use configure the Ignition v1 release. That's not Flatcar specific. It's the other way around. Flatcar uses v1, so v1 continues to be supported by us. Any other target operating system or similar using v1 as well can also make use of that work and will work with the version 1 that we're maintaining.
I can perhaps provide a little bit of context. I'm Benjamin Gilbert. I'm the upstream Ignition maintainer. The two spec versions are mostly compatible from a user's perspective. The reason that there is a hard split between these versions is that we took the opportunity, we expected that Ignition would come into wider use with things like Fedora CoreOS and RHEL CoreOS. We took the opportunity to do some cleanups in the spec that unfortunately are not machine translatable, because there are cases where the old version of the spec is ambiguous. And until the instant that you're running on the machine and can look at the file system and figure out what files and directories are already there, you don't always know what the old spec version was going to do. So there exists code to do best effort translation from the old format to the new format, but it can't be perfect unless you're on the node.
That's actually work that we're orienting on for the backwards compatibility part. Oh, Matthew actually spoke up in the chat. He's driving that work.
Vince, you have your, okay.
Yeah, so I mean, just to follow up though, like, would Red Hat folks like be able to speak if like this is compatible with their own repo distributions, I guess?
If any distribution uses version 1, then it will be compatible with the PR as it stands. If any distribution would want to use version 2, that could be introduced to cluster API alongside the version 1 work that we're doing.
Okay, but the current PR like should probably be, I guess like should add like fields to support different versions of Ignition at different. So where I'm coming from is like this says like it supports ignition configuration, which it sounds like it does have like multiple versions of it. And the last one is V2 or V3, whatever it was. And if we're not holistically supporting like all the repos that are adopting it, like maybe we should, you know, separate it in like a different versions. But then I guess like the other question is like that came up like during the backlog grooming is like should this be like in a different bootstrapper at this point, like given it's Flatcar specific? It sounds like it's not really Flatcar specific. It depends like on the version of Ignition. So there is like a compatibility matrix that we need to publish as well. I'm curious, like for the other maintainers, is Alberto here? Then Fabrizio, Cecile, like what do you all think that like we should do here? Because I'm on the fence because it's like supporting one specific distro, kind of, and using.
It's not the distro. It's really just it's general support of version 1, including having an actively maintained repository.
But it doesn't say version 1 in there today, right? Like it just says.
No, that's gonna be added. It will be using the version 1 suffix. So we're not using the plain URL. Similarly to what Origin does with version 2, now we will do with version 1 just to make it explicit. And so you mentioned earlier that you don't know if there's a version distinguishing or if you should add a field. The groundwork for all of that is there. And this is what the second bullet points referenced comment actually addresses. So this is and it's referenced from that comment. So if you follow that link in the comment, that's more or less a specification and go down a little. Then we'll that's the part. So this is discussing extending on what we're doing. So it's not a problem at all at any point in time to support any other version of Ignition.
Fabrizio, go ahead.
So it will be really helpful to have an opinion of someone else using Ignition, for instance, Red Hat fork. So I admit my ignorance about the topic, but I have one question. Supporting the next version of Ignition will be to import another difference, another library that basically, and to support both, that means will be that we have to import Ignition 1 and then Ignition version 3 that supports specification version 2. So it seems to me, what worries me is that it seems that the Ignition ecosystem is kind of fragmented, and we are pulling in this fragmentation in our code. And I'm just wondering where this ends, because if someone if we gate this, we allow this, then what if someone comes and tells, I want also this flavor of Ignition, or this that means adding another import and making all the groundwork. So I'm trying to understand when this ends.
So
I see this as a fairly one-off thing. The new Ignition spec and the transpiler tooling for it are designed to be distro independent, and unfortunately, there's just this migration that needs to happen. So I would view this as a way to make sure all of the Ignition using distros have a path for now, and then that path goes to a unified place in the medium to long term.
Alberto, go ahead.
Yeah, I have similar concerns. Like, I'm not sure if we want to bake in our API. We want to be coupled with the Ignition version, which seems that's what we are proposing at the moment. So that's a bit of a concern to me. But to be completely honest, I haven't looked at the PR for a while. So I'll make sure to have a look right after this call.
Fabrizio, you still have your hand raised. Do you want to say something?
No, but please add a comment at the end of that clarifies what we just discussed. So where this is a one-off things, there is commitment to converge, possibly an estimation date where we want to convert and stuff like that. More info, the better.
Tilo.
Thanks. So as Benjamin said, the version 1 and 2 are basically not translatable into each other. So adding version 2, even though after we're done with our work, would be significantly easier because like the groundwork's all there, would be like supporting yet another config language for operating systems. So there needs to be a clear distinction, and I actually I'm very happy for the also Benjamin sharing the news that version 2 has upwards and downwards compatibility built in starting from version 2. That's of course great news. It doesn't serve the version 1 problem though. So anyone using version 1 to configure their backend, their operating system, will need specific version 1 support. It's just like two protocols that are incompatible to each other.
Oh, okay, I don't see any other hands raised. So if no one has anything else, any other thoughts about this, yeah, feel free to continue the discussion on the issue, and all the links are in the Google Doc. And as mentioned, Tilo, if you can like provide a brief description about the compatibility matrix and what needs to happen in the issue, it would be easy. It would be easier for others to follow from there. Fabrizio, go ahead.
Sorry, there is also another import that points from a repo, which is a personal report that don't even have a milestone. I understand that this is used somewhere else. I'm just worried to import it in copy. So
it's actually referenced as the second major bullet point in the. That's the data URL thing a little further down. It's on the slip to the second page. This one, yeah. So as
Jonathan. Oh, continue, please. Still continue.
I'm just basically reading what's on the screen. As called out in the discussion, this is used by both Linux distributions and by the origin Ignition as well.
Yeah, but the point that importing a repo without a milestone is a bad practice. So I understand that someone buy it in. The question is if, as a copy, we want to buy in this, because what happens if the repos goes away? We don't have any guarantee about this.
Can you folks fork it and add a milestone to it?
Jonathan, please go ahead.
So yeah, basically this isn't an ideal situation, I agree. But to provide some more context, so this repository was added because we're basically consuming Ignition as a library, and Ignition itself inside its implementation consumes that repository. There are no releases, there are not even Git tags in this repository, like in the origin one. And if I remember correctly, we've only added this as a dependency for test code. I'll have to double check that, but yeah, so this maybe makes it slightly less bad. And also, yeah, as stated before, this library is packaged in some Linux distros as it is without official releases. And my initial intention was to simply see if we can replace the functionality that this library does using, the Go standard library and, get rid of this dependency altogether. However, apparently, it's not so simple without re-implementing the whole library. And there wasn't even, one function that I could steal, so to speak, from that library and then just add an attribution. So, and lastly, there doesn't seem to be any alternative that I found for solving that specific problem, which is encoding file content in the data URL format. So there is some escaping, there are some prefixes and suffixes that need to take place. There are various formats, there are some flags about the encoding scheme. And yeah, it doesn't seem like something that we can quickly stitch together and ditch this dependency.
Fabrizio, followed by Benjamin.
Only one question. So I will be personally more comfortable if you fork and add a label, or if you, since that you are already using it in Flatcar Linux initiation, if you wrap it with a method, so basically we buy in something that is offered by a maintained repo.
Benjamin?
If it's relevant, I just looked at the old Ignition code base, and the parts of it that would be imported to use the spec are using that library a little bit in the validation code and in one place in the translation code. It's not really deeply used.
Fabrizio, you still have your hand up. Do you want to say something?
No, I'm not really concerned if it is used inside Ignition. I'm concerned if we have it as a direct rep and Ignition masked it. I'm concerned if we are adding it as our direct reference. That's my point.
Tilo?
This is more a question for Benjamin, actually. Is our current Ignition releases still using that dependence? And
yes,
would we both benefit from like a common fork that we both maintain?
So the upstream repo hasn't changed since 2019, and I don't recall that we've ever had any problems with the code base, but if there was a maintained fork, I think we would be open to switching to it, sure.
Awesome. Then I think I don't want to preempt Johannes because he just raised his hand. The fork came to me, but then I'm very happy with that path forward. I'd fork it in the Flatcar Linux org and give Benjamin and folks access to the repo so we can both maintain it.
Johanan, sorry, I got your name wrong last time.
It's all good. I'm used to it. Yeah, I just double checked, and the only place we're using this library, it's actually just one line within the capd implementation, specifically the new Docker adapter that we added for Ignition. We had a similar one for Cloud Init already. As far as I know, it is only used for testing, but yeah, it's not in an _test file. So theoretically, if someone uses capd for anything production-like for some reason, then maybe we should treat this as a production code and not just something used for unit tests. I don't know if that makes the decision easier, but personally, I'm perfectly fine with forking the repo and I don't know, some collaborative maintainership along with Red Hat or any other entity is relevant. So it sounds good to me anyway.
Folks, I do want to mention that we do have some other topics on the agenda, and I would like to time box this at this point. If there are further discussions, we can always follow up on the PR itself and on the corresponding issue. Benjamin, do you still have your hands up? Do you want to say something at the end?
Yeah, just briefly, a suggestion I would make, forking since Ignition is packaged in downstream repos, forking is a bit of an anti-pattern. So before we reach that step, I would suggest reaching out to the maintainer of the existing repo and finding out whether they're still active. Maybe they'd be willing to add tags or co-maintainers or whatever we feel we need.
Thanks everyone for that discussion. If there are any follow-up items, follow-up discussions that need to happen, please use the PR or the associated issue and we can continue from there. Moving on, we have the demo for CAPI UI tool, Jonathan.
Hey, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jonathan. I'm a new hire at Microsoft and I've been working on CAPI and CAPZ for about 3 months now. Could I screen share for this demo?
Yes, 1 second.
I've enabled it. You just need to stop screen sharing, Rush.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let me see. All right, can everybody see?
Yeah, it looks good.
All right, cool. So I'll be giving a quick demo of a visualization app that I built for CAPI developers and CAPI operators who need to get insight quickly into their multi-cluster setups. So this app gives people that insight by making it much more accessible for developers to understand Cluster API, and especially people who are new to it, but also it helps people who have been using it for a while. So what this app does is it gives a bird's eye view of a multi-cluster configuration. It visualizes the CAPI resources for a given cluster, and it also lets you see the specs of that resource. So hopping into the demo, here I have a kind cluster running locally, and we can see that it manages 4 other clusters. So we manage Azure Default, Azure Machine Pool, Docker Machine Pool, and Docker Symbol. So these are on CAPZ and these are on CAPD, and that's shown with the icon there. So for our target cluster, we can click into this and we can see a visualization of the CRDs associated with it. So firstly, the cluster is grouped into 3 buckets, and I chose these categories, cluster infra, control plane, and workers based on cluster CTL describe. So for this, we have the resource sets, the bindings, and the Azure clusters. The control plane, we have the control planes, the machine templates, and the machines. And in the workers, we have other machine templates, config templates, machine deployments, machine sets, and so on. So these nodes in the tree are built based on the owner refs of the parents. And the nodes are color coded based on the different providers. So for a given resource, we can also click into it and we can see the CRDs. And we can even search to find certain fields. And we can do that for all the resources. So we can look into other clusters as well and see that it's able to generate it on the fly. So this prototype that I built is a proof of concept of creating a UI tool for multi-cluster configurations. And I think we can extend it even further by showing not just the API specs and the resources, but also telling you something about each of the CRDs itself. So for example, in the Azure cluster, we could give provider-specific infrastructure details. So for example, we could explain what the resource is. We could say something about what each field does and why it's there. Or we could even take it further and create another visualization of each of the resources. So for the Azure cluster, we could draw a diagram showing that the VNet is made out of different subnets for the network spec. And we could show how traffic flows from a machine through the load balancer to a public IP. So this project has a lot of potential to improve the cluster API experience for developers and new users alike by making it more accessible and easier to understand. And I'd like to bring that to developers by open sourcing it and putting on a K8s repo, and also by working together with other CAFI contributors. Does anyone have any questions?
Alberto, go ahead.
First of all, thanks for showing that. This is pretty awesome. Question is the goal to just visualize things, or are you planning to give a way to manipulate clusters as well, like create new clusters and manipulate existing resource?
That's a great question. So when I started this project, I was thinking about creating a UI tool, and I wasn't really sure where we could deliver the most value. So I initially thought about creating a tool like a dashboard to manipulate stuff like you said, but I felt like a lot of the commands we have are already very powerful, and it would just be kind of creating a GUI wrapper. But what we didn't really have with the commands was a way to sort of see a top-down view of everything. So I think it could be possible to add some way to like edit the YAML files and redeploy it. But I think the primary purpose is to be able to see how everything is connected very quickly and be able to reach any resource very quickly as well.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Does anyone have any other questions?
Yeah.
I'm also looking for feedback as well. So.
Go ahead. Yeah. Fabrizio.
First of all, thank you also for me. This is awesome, and I like cluster cut describe seeing being used in a different way. I have one question. One thing that I find interesting is of this view is that it can really help to investigate problem using condition. Have you considered to provide a different view that is not focused on understanding provider how the data is at, but understanding how the cluster is currently the current state of the cluster?
Yeah. That's something I'd like to work on in the future. So far, I've only created this view, and I probably need to think a bit more about how to organize that as well. But for example, we could, well, the nodes currently are color coded based on the provider, but in a different view, we could color code it like red or something. If it's not working, we could color it gray or something if it's provisioning, and so on.
That would be great. Thank you for this. I see a lot of potential.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is a great demo. Although, do you mind adding some links to the doc if it is accessible somewhere that the users can, that folks in the community can go and try at this point?
Yeah, of course. It's on my personal GitHub. I can make a README on how to set up later. I'll drop it in the Slack or something.
That would be awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I don't see any hands raised. Did you want to show anything else in the demo?
No, that's it so far.
Okay. Thank you for the demo. Moving on to the next item. Cecile, you have it.
So I just wanted to follow up. Last week, we discussed maybe having a discussion for the roadmap and proposing ideas for things that we, as a cluster API community, want to focus on in the near future. So I started the discussion, focusing it more on like V1 in general, not so much like V1.1. After some feedback, just because we don't want to just focus on the next minor, we just want to plan out what the next year is going to look like. And we already have a lot of issues that are going to be put into V1.1. So this is more about what's after. But yeah, please like add any ideas that you have. If you can link it to an issue, that'd be really great. and then feel free to like upvote other people's ideas. So we can gather some feedback about what the community wants and what's the most important for us for the next few minor releases. Yeah, that's it.
Cecile, thank you for opening that discussion. Yeah, everyone, please do go ahead and go through other comments and then like upvote, and then if you have any items that you'd like to be covered that you think are valuable to be covered and then we want release, please do mention them in the thread. That's the end of the agenda. Are there anyone on the meeting who haven't said hi but want to say hi now? Are there folks new to the meeting and want to say hi? I don't see any hands raised. Okay, folks, that's the end. We don't have any more topics to cover. Have a great week, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.